Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we are fortunate to be joined by the fantastic Stasey to talk about her latest series, Bridge and Tunnel. And this wasn't the first time that you'd worked with Ed Burns. You'd worked with him on the movie Summertime a couple of years ago, and he actually really wrote this role with you in mind for it. So when you first got the scripts and started looking through the details, what are some of the ways that you felt that he'd really written your strengths as a performer and things that he knew that you would bring into this character into her?
I think that Ed and I are very in sync when it comes to how, comes to the women that he wants to portray, right? I know that Jill, who is my character in Bridge and Tunnel, and Susie, my character in Summertime, are both very forthright, very assured, self-assured women who, have these long-standing relationships with childhood loves and are kind of calling the shots all the time. And, as I was reading through the scripts for Bridge and Tunnel, I was struck just by her, her cockiness, her ground. Oh, she's also incredibly grounded. She's just she's kind of just this, she's easygoing and she's cool. She's just the kind of girl that you want to marry, And I think that that's she's the girl from your hometown that you always thought was fucking cool growing up and wanted to be more like. And, she's the kind of girl I wish I'd been more like when I was growing up. Yeah. So it's just, there was continuity between those two things, between Susie and Jill. Susie's a little bit, I think, less feisty than Jill is. Jill is she's still young. It's funny because I was actually playing a younger character in Bridge and Tunnel than I was in Summertime. I was playing a 21-year-old, which feels crazy. I think I pulled it off.
But within that idea and that way that she really calls things out as she sees them, we see that she actually develops a lot of that to a certain degree from her mom, who kind of delivers things in that same way. Did you find yourself really looking at the specific details of who her mom is, the way that she approaches even just conversations with the two of them, and thinking about ways that you wanted to pull that into Jill as well?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, just because of the nature of how we shot and how COVID restricted so much of our time, I only got one day on set with Leslie, who played my mum. So we had one day for all of our scenes from each 6 episodes. And I definitely think that the similarities are more numerous than the differences between them. The only difference between them that I really see is that Jill tends to have a little bit more tact and is a bit more patient. And that's because she's younger. And I definitely see her getting older and becoming more impatient like her mum. It's just the two of them. So they're constantly just at it with each other. But yeah, it was really great to have Leslie for that one day. I wish we could have spent more time together, and I wish it could have happened earlier in the shoot. I think it fell about midway through our shooting. But from the script, not knowing who Leslie was or what she was going to do, you can just sort of that character vibrates off the page. And it, I wanted it to sort of resemble the kinds of fights and conversations I had with my mum when I was younger. Now that I'm an adult and I'm 30, I don't really fight with my mum anymore, but I remember that sensation of being kind of a teen and being stuck at home and feeling that friction between the two of you in close proximity. But they kind of behave like sisters. So I just wanted it to feel like, it's hard to make it look like you've known someone your whole life when you've only known them for one day. But Leslie's incredibly easy to love and to work with.
Well, with that shift, with obviously all of the COVID protocols and the fact that you filmed all 6 episodes in only about 5 weeks, did that really change the usual ability to have any sort of rehearsal or to really spend time with the other actors before you would even go into filming scenes as much?
We spent all of our time together because we were basically holed up at this Hampton Inn and Suites in Rockville Centre. And we weren't not allowed to leave, but we were encouraged not to, unless it was completely necessary. And the rehearsal process was over Zoom. It wasn't quite as extensive as we would have liked it to have been, but naturally, as is with most of Ed's productions, he really relies on you to kind of bring whatever the hell is distinct and special about you to each of your characters. So a lot of it was improv. A lot of us got to sort of throw in bits and pieces here that we kind of came up with in our own time. But yeah, there was a very short window of a formal rehearsal period, but we rehearsed on our own. We didn't have anything else to do, we just would listen to music and smoke cigarettes because that's all we do in the show, and run our lines.
With that idea and that way that he really does create, you know, a roadmap, but gives so much freedom to the actors that he works with, what are some of the things that you feel you personally really got to bring to the table with who Jill was as a character?
It's funny because each day I was kind of coming up with something new. And I think that we really did just hit the ground running. So it was just kind of like, we like the first scene that I shot was from episode 5, which just aired. It was the birthday dinner scene between myself and Jimmy, played by Sam Bartholomeus. And honestly, like I at the time I kind of was just sort of remember my lines, remember the accent, get it out, make sure you look like you know this person. But I think my affection for Sam is something that was like definitely born out of knowing him, and something that needed to be there in order for us to like look like a believable couple. I think that Jill on paper is a little less I think she's probably a little less what's what I'm looking for. She's a little bit like, let me think. I'm trying to think of the right word to describe her. I think on paper Jill is a little less sassy, for lack of a better word. I think that Ed really allowed me to take it into this kind of like shit stirring place, which is very Long Island. It's also very Australia, because he gives you these great outlines and then expects you to sort of fill it in with that texture. Also, I think that we were in danger of Jill looking kind of like a bit of a tease emotionally with Jimmy, like pulling him and pushing him. But mercifully, like I think I was able to really ground her and make her feel like a thoughtful and deeply introspective person who is in love but also has a very sensible vision of the future.
And within that thoughtfulness, there's some really well-crafted details, like the fact that she doesn't just support him going off and being a photographer for National Geographic. Like she knows who the photographers are that he really loves, and the details of what it is that he gravitates towards. And it feels like that's actually a huge part of her self-preservation emotionally. Did you find yourself really thinking of it in that way, that actually the reason that she's pulling back so consistently is because of just like this huge love that she wants, and not wanting to be the person that ever holds him back, as much as she also doesn't want to hold herself back?
Yeah, I think that the love Jill feels for Jimmy is also one that she feels for herself. Like you just said, Jimmy would love to just stick it out in Long Island with Jill, probably get her pregnant within the next year, have a family and a life, and do fashion photography, and she can do fashion design in Long Island. Like he has big dreams and big hopes, and so does she. Hers are a little less uh, focused than his because he has a job that's going to propel him forward. But yeah, she loves him a lot, but she also knows that she can't be with him forever, at least not from this point until forever, maybe one day in the future. And while I do think she does a lot of things out of that love for Jimmy, I think ultimately her loyalty and commitment is to herself and her own future. She talks very frequently about her future and how she feels she is owed this freedom and is longing for it. She also wants to just have fun for the next month and enjoy this space in this weird vacuum of time that they're not going to get to recreate again before the world and responsibilities of being an adult flood in and change everything. She just wants to kind of be suspended in time with him for a while. But yeah, she knows what's up. She knows what she needs to go and do, and she's not afraid of it.
And in working with Sam and building out that texture and that history of their intimacy and their backstory, you know, they've been together on and off since they were 14, but they've grown up literally right next door to each other since childhood. So they know every single thing about each other. What were the things that you and Sam found most useful to really fill in terms of backstory together versus some of the work that you just wanted to do by yourself and create in your mind for yourself?
Honestly, we just like had to really like each other, and we had to like, I was just like Sam's biggest cheerleader, you know what I mean? I was always like, you're so talented, you're so gorgeous, look at us go, everyone's gonna love us. And in turn he did the same for me. Like he was my biggest cheerleader. We became such good friends almost instantly. And I'm a very like open, candid person, and I don't think I'm hard to like. I mean, maybe you don't like me eventually, but at first you're going to like me. And luckily I wasn't with Sam long enough for him to dislike me by the end of it. But yeah, I think like we just kind of we had to form a natural and authentic affection for each other, as well as a respect. I've done so many shows where I had a romantic, I had like a love interest in, and for the most part, I've worked with really amazing people who have been very respectful and very kind and generous. And then other times I have not had that, and it sucks. So yeah, I don't know. I just like, I made sure to just really pay attention to Sam, and I paid attention to the things about him that I knew were distinct and couldn't be replicated in someone else, and making sure that he knew that about himself. You know, just like nice stuff. I was just really nice to him.
And within that as well, there's so many different layers and moments of intimacy between them in completely different ways. And particularly as the season progresses and they know that there's an expiration date on this time that they're spending together as well. Did you find yourself starting to think about the dynamic of their relationship and the rapport that you wanted to have together a little bit differently in some of the later episodes with that in mind?
I think that like they're basically like family in a weird way. So their relationship, like, it's peaks and troughs. It's, I love you, I want to fuck you, everything is amazing, you're annoying the fuck out of me, you need to get away from me. Like it is just like this constant push and pull, this unspoken thing, which is also being simultaneously spoken about a lot. Like they could suspend their understanding of the future and what was coming for them for a while, but yeah, it's one of those sad things. And Ed and I would laugh about it because like Jill doesn't have like a lot of fun in this season. Like a lot of her stuff is quite like emotionally fraught. It's about being, the grown up, and about trying to make difficult decisions, and about like love, being forlorn, be like losing love, losing someone that you love, moving on with your life, moving out of home, like a lot of really difficult and like exciting but also sad revelations about yourself. And so, yeah, there's like, I think, because like I said, we didn't get to shoot it sequentially. Like we shot a scene from episode 5, day 1, we shot episode 6, day 2, then episode 1 was later. Like the first scene of the show was the second to last scene we shot overall, which was actually quite helpful because it's a very intense scene. But yeah, like it's a little difficult to track sometimes when you're shooting everything at once, but there's definitely a huge difference between the scenes between Sam and I when like things aren't going well versus they are going well, and we felt that on the days too, because like it was fun to fight with Sam, but it's more fun to be in love with Sam. Like we just, I think, have great chemistry, and I think it looks like we love each other because I do love him, and that stuff is always more fun for sure.
Yeah. And on the series as well, you had an intimacy coordinator who's working with both of you on some of the scenes together. And then on top of that, there was also the fact that there were even less crew on site because of COVID protocols. Do you find, because an intimacy coordinator is a very new position within the industry, is it something that you find beneficial and helpful in figuring out some of the choreography and some of the character points within it? Or do you think of it really just in terms of just structuring out the movements with them?
I think it is essential that all sets have intimacy coordinators. I personally, the choreography aspect of it, to me, unless there are like, luckily with Ed, he likes to shoot things in one shot, so you can kind of do what you want and the camera will find you. Nothing about what we shot was that complicated in that sense. Like we weren't moving around the room too much. We had that one scene at the beginning. But I think the role of the intimacy coordinator is just to be kind of a third party witness to what is happening, and a whistleblower when things are going badly, and mercifully on this set, that aspect of her job description wasn't like, at least on my scenes, wasn't activated, I guess you could say. But yeah, I've been on sets where people have not given a shit about your comfort, and people have just expected you to turn it on, or like you're kind of treated as this kind of sex toy as opposed to a human being and an actor. And luckily that was not the case here. And, one of my best friends and my producing partner is an intimacy coordinator, and she's amazing at it. And it's just like, it's great. It's, everybody you would hope has good intentions, but people also just kind of get very comfortable on set. Set is a weird playground where like the rules of like regular work don't really apply, lines get blurred, people are inappropriate, and sometimes it's fine and sometimes it's really fucking not. And you know, I I understand how conduct on set is kind of it's hard to police, because you're like, well, I'm asking this person to get naked and have sex on a sink. You know, like she's this the woman that we worked with and intimacy coordinators in general, I think also serves kind of a buffer between you and the rest of the crew. You're like, you can't come in here, they haven't got any clothes on, you can't talk to them about it in these terms. You know what I mean? Like, I, as a director myself, and I've been in a lot of situations in very, very intimate settings, and my producer, my intimacy coordinator is like, you can't really use these words, don't talk about it in terms of like how hot you think it is, or how like, you know, like how, what the effect that it's having on you. And I think intimacy coordinators just help create that kind of environment where it's purely professional, and it's like, this is a job, this isn't recreational sex someone is having in front of you, this is for the show, and it's an essential part of this story, so let's treat it like it is any other scene, but also with just like a lot more sensitivity.
And, you know, another aspect of the environment on set is that in your position on this series, coming in as a lead, you're part of setting that overall environment and that tone, and what that's going to be alongside Ed Burns and some of the other cast. And, you know, particularly with the experience that you have being on so many sets, and seeing how different people lead that space, what was important to you to pull into the environment for the rest of the cast and the crew that you were working with on this project?
I wanted everybody to fear me, you know. Now it's funny because I was actually the oldest member of the cast, which you know, aside from Ed, and which is the first time that's ever happened to me. And I kind of didn't really want to be in charge of the way people behaved or the way people conducted themselves. Like, I don't want to be a narc, I don't want to wrangle people, but I do think that the like bulk of experience I had definitely lent itself to me being a bit more kind of like calm, I guess, on set than I normally would be. I'm a very social person, and like I'm, I'm like an easily excitable person. So I can't say with any certainty that I created a mature working environment. In fact, I think I probably did the opposite. But I know that Ed spoke to Sam and I independently of the rest of the cast about like COVID protocol and about wearing our masks and making sure that our cast members were wearing their masks, which I fully understand. And that it's a difficult thing to ask actors to do, because like, you're normally not in charge of anything like that. You're in charge of your own person, and even then other people are the ones who touch you up and send you off. So like I said, I don't know that I can take any credit for contributing to a you know, mature working environment, but I definitely would pull people up if they weren't wearing their masks. But people would pull me up too. It was like a very there was a lot of mutual respect on that set.
Yeah. And diving back to some of the details of Jill, you know, you've mentioned how, particularly with the Long Island accent, that you actually found that you really needed to stay in your accent, even when you left set at the end of the day, but particularly between takes, so that you didn't lose it. Was that something that you found very early on, or did you discover it partway through the process that you really needed to do that with the accent and the dialect?
I felt it from day one. I just kind of had this feeling, because the accent was intended to be stronger in this project than it was in the previous one I had done with Ed. And I was really nervous about it. And I knew going into it which words would trip me up and which sounds were inconsistent with the dialect. And so I just had to stay in it pretty much the whole time. I would drop in and out of it. If I had like 5 days off, I might go back to speaking in my normal accent. And it's funny, I definitely think it helped, but a big part of doing that accent was just trusting that I could do it. You know, like I watched some scenes back and I really see myself being like, I need to talk like this, and saying the words as opposed to really like experiencing them, which is what happens sometimes when you have a dialect that's really foreign from your own. And I think in the future, I probably wouldn't stay in that accent for the 5 weeks or however long it takes to shoot. I would probably go in and out of it a little bit more, because at the end of the day, I rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, and it definitely, like, the proof is in the pudding, you know, it's out there, and I did a good job. But the experience of being on set with that accent could have been a lot more fun for myself if I had just given myself more credit and a little bit less like scrutiny. You know, I had a dialect coach called Joshua Bitton, who's amazing, and he's from Queens, and he was like, I think you just need to relax and enjoy it because you're doing great and you sound like you're from there. And it is an accent that comes kind of naturally to me. It always has. I've always loved doing that accent. I hope I get to do it more in the future and sink into it a little bit more.
Did you find that with the dialect in mind, that when there would be any sort of script changes that would come in at the last minute, that it forced you to work in slightly different ways though? Because you're not then just thinking about, okay, I need to memorize this line. You're thinking about the sounds of the words and the cadence and the pacing. That's also a very specific element to it.
Yeah, I would fly into a full internal panic when Ed would be like, okay, we're going to change this, or we're going to just throw in a new scene at you. And I'm like, oh, fucking God. And of course, that's how it had to be. And in the end, it was fine. But yeah, it's not like, I think people kind of take for granted that like the words that you say in this dialect need to be really considered. Like it's very intentional. Like I had this one day when they threw a phone call scene at me, which Ed always says aren't real scenes. If you're on the phone, it's not a real scene, which is hilarious. And something I think actors actually probably agree with. But what was real is that I had to do the accent and I had to do it like on the fly, learn about 2 pages of dialogue and then say words like call and all, which are the ones that like throw me because they have to be subtle, but they're also there. You know what I mean? You can't ignore them. So I watch back some of those scenes and I'm like, wish I'd had a day. I should have just learned the entire like 6 episodes off by heart from the beginning. Probably would have been way smarter. But yeah, you're right. It was a little bit stressful, but the pressure on Ed sets is never really felt as much as it is imagined. Like no one is there being like, you better fucking pull it off or I'm gonna fucking fire you. Like no one's there doing that shit to you. It's only you in your head. Like I have a mini Ed Burns in my head that is not at all related to the real one, who is like, you know, telling me to get my shit together.
Like the real one's just like, you did a great job, and the one inside your head is saying completely the opposite.
Yeah, I was like kicking my eardrums.
And with, you know, with the physical aesthetic and thinking about costume design in the show, beyond the fact that it's a period piece, did you find the fact that, you know, she's pursuing this huge passion that she has within the fashion industry, and even down to the point where she's wearing an outfit at one point that we know that she made herself and self-styled and created, and that tells you so much about her stylistic aesthetic and the voice that she wants to have within the fashion industry, was a different type of window into her as a character through the costumes than usual?
Yeah, I mean, Jill's pretty low key. Everything about her across the board is pretty consistent. She's not doing anything that's like too like focus pulling. She's just kind of there and she's just like cool. You know what I mean? She's just like a cool jazz solo of a person who's just like moving through the space in the outfit that she picked that morning. Didn't about it too much. You know, she looks good in everything, and just designing things that flatter her and that hopefully flatter all people. It's funny because I don't necessarily see Jill as a fashion designer in the future. I see her as more of a costumer. I could see her on a set, you know, being in charge of a big team of people and dressing famous actors. I think she would thrive in that environment because I think she isn't scared of anybody. But fashion itself, the industry is very toxic and it's very wasteful and it's very competitive. And although I think she could survive those things, I don't think she's super interested in them. And you know, just based on the amount that I know about her, having played her for those 5 weeks, I think that she's like better suited to a world where she can wear sneakers and, you know, hang out with other interesting creatives and people that are not in fashion, because her experience with people in fashion has been bad up until this point. Like she is not interested in the nastiness, and like I think she's kind of thrown by how difficult it is, because I think because she's so easygoing and, you know, she's cool and she's like, you know, she's been queen bee for a long time. Yeah.
And I love the way that you described how the act of like putting on her nails actually helped you find a lot of her physical motion and movement. Do you find that when you're constructing a character that there tends to be a singular detail like that, which really gives you a window into them? Or was that just very specific to this instance with Jill?
It was very specific to Jill. I think in the future, I'm definitely going to approach each character with that same kind of attention to detail. Because in the past, I've just kind of felt it out as I went along, like based on what booked me the job, I will just dive into that version of the thing. But like it's so much more fun when you make big choices and when you can anchor yourself around a physical aspect or an idea, right? And the nails for Jill, like they weren't particularly dramatic. They weren't like talons, but they are significantly longer than my nails. And when you have them, they just like make your hands look so much like my hands look so feminine. And so like they look just like they were trying to teach you something every day. You know, like every time I would speak to somebody, it would just naturally unfold in that way. It felt like I had like fans for hands. But yeah, the hair as well was a huge part of that. Just the eyebrows and the hair and the nails, like were the three things that really like sent me back in time and put me in that person's body. And I think how you walk is a huge part of it too. I'm a kind of goofy walker in my life, like my feet go out and I kind of waddle. So it's like keep your feet pointed forward and just be like, you know, your feet will take you where you need to go. You just have to make a decision about how you want them to do it.
On a different note, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey of starting out working in Australia when you first moved to LA, because, you know, you've talked in the past about how you actually found it quite challenging when you first moved to LA, and it took a bit longer to start booking jobs than you had thought, and how you had to really think about the ways in which you needed to work differently or approach things differently, because at that point you'd built up this entire network in Australia already, and then you're coming to a space where you don't have those pre-existing relationships, and you know, as much as it's the same industry, there's a lot of nuances in the way that people communicate, and things just function ever so slightly differently in a lot of different ways. So what were some of the things that you felt you really had to pivot and adjust for yourself at that point in your career?
Well, firstly, I think Australia can be quite closed off to people who have done jobs that they don't think are cool or edgy or interesting. Like I did a soap for years, and I was sort of fighting against that. So I was happy to move to a country where I was completely anonymous and nobody knew what I was or what I was capable of. But the biggest difference, I think, between the Australian industry and the American is that in America, it really is a business. You know, like you are a product and you are also a CEO, and you are the CEO of Caitlin Stasey Industries or whatever your incorporation is. And I didn't really realize that until quite a lot further into my career. And even when I did realize it, I kind of rejected it. And it's only now as a 30-year-old woman that I realize that you have to take it as seriously as you do the rest of it. Also that like you have to take it seriously at all. Like we were speaking before about having to do auditions over Zoom. Now, granted, the world has changed very dramatically the past year, and there's an unprecedented shift in online, well, maybe not so unprecedented, but definitely expedited shift onto like online communications. And I don't have an amazing setup in my house to film myself. I have my iPhone, which is absolutely cracked to smithereens, if you can see. I don't have a mic. I just, for the first time ever, bought a light stand because my auditioning was entirely dependent on daylight. Whether or not I could apply for a job was based on when the sun was going to go down, which is just like way too primitive for like this modern age. And so that is kind of the main difference, I think. Like auditioning in Australia, it's kind of like a silly thing. Like being an actor or being a creative is kind of like, yeah, I just do it because it's fun, you know, no worries. I could go be a bricklayer next week if I wanted to. No fucking, you know, not too precious about the whole thing. Whereas here, people take it very seriously. You have to have like an IMDb Pro, and you've got to get your headshots, and you've got to get your publicist, and you've got to like, there's a lot of different people whose job it is to help you realize what your job is. And that doesn't really exist back home because the industry is significantly smaller, but it's also just like, it's a lot less self-important and less serious. And there's elements of that I think are really fucking cool. And I, you know, am like a fan of. And then there are parts of it that I'm just like, doesn't help me. Like when I first moved here, I didn't really know what to wear to auditions, and I lost out on things because I wore weird outfits. And do I think that's fair? No. But it's just the game, baby, and you've got to look good. You've got to fucking go out there and be a thing. And the older I get, the more nervous I am about looking beautiful forever, and the fact that like that's going to change. In Australia, I think it matters less. In the UK, I think it matters less. Like, this is a very like image focused business in general, but it's tough to keep up here, like the changing face of beauty is becoming more uniform, and also the cost of it it's astronomical. Like, I haven't ever gotten anything done except for a chemical peel, which yielded no results. But I've talked to people about things like filler and Botox, and like, I'm not opposed to any of those things, and I am definitely going to get it if I need to or want to in the future. But that's a part of this industry that doesn't really apply back home.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and all of your experience working on the season. I hope that we get more seasons of this, and you get a bit more than 5 weeks to make the next one.
I really
Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you, Maha.